Welcome to 5 Good Minutes.
You're listening to today's inspirational message on the book of Daniel
With Dan Irvin.
Daniel chapter 1 verse 17 says this: "To these 4 young men God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kind." So we're told that Daniel and his friends were wiser than all the magicians and the enchanters in the Babylonian Empire. You know, these exiles ripped out of their homeland, put into a foreign culture. Somehow they rise to the top. They become the wisest and some of the most powerful people in one of the most powerful empires on earth. You know, verse 17 is clear about how that happens. It says, God gave them knowledge and understanding. It wasn't their own natural ability. It wasn't the way they were brought up. It wasn't their own clever strategy, but God gave them this knowledge and this understanding. So this is something we can understand today. The true wisdom, it's not necessarily something we can achieve, but it's rather something that is received, that is given to us by God. If we go to him and humbly ask and humbly search for it. You know, wisdom today, I think, is often tied in with intelligence or credentials or with someone's ability to manipulate an argument in their favor. But that's not really what biblical wisdom is. Wisdom in the Bible is the ability to see reality from God's perspective. It's not something that we can just mix up on our own or devise on our own. It has to come from God himself, truly from God himself. Real wisdom begins not with this idea of being confident in ourselves, but with humility, saying, I don't know what's best for me. I need someone in my life. I need God in my life who is wiser than me, who knows the way, and to search for wisdom. You know, that's where Daniel begins. He and his friends are not trying to climb some sort of spiritual ladder. You know, God gives them this wisdom. And this wisdom, it doesn't make them proud or arrogant. It makes them useful. They become servants in Babylon. You know, this is the second important thing out of this passage, is that wisdom, it's not important for dominating or for rising to the top, but it's to be used to serve. You know, Daniel and his friends didn't use their God-given wisdom to elevate their status. You know, they didn't form a huddle and wait for Babylon to burn to the ground, but they served this pagan king. They embedded deeply in the structures of this empire, but yet they were able to remain true and distinct to who God was, to have this faithful presence in this land that was lost. You know, in the truest sense, Jesus is a greater example of Daniel, of who he is. He didn't just enter a foreign empire. He left his heavenly home, entered our broken mess of a world. The one who had perfective wisdom used it not to rule over us, but to serve us. Philippians 2 talks about this. It says that even though he, Jesus, was in very nature God, he did not consider equality with God something to cling to. Instead, he emptied himself. He took on the form of a servant and humbled himself all the way to death, even death on a cross. You see, in a world that worships power, Jesus shows a different way. Wisdom that was shaped out of love, power that was poured out in service and influence that exercised its influence through humility. You know, that's why the cross is not just a place where our sins are forgiven, but it's also a place where wisdom, true wisdom, is revealed. 1 Corinthians talks about this in this way. It says that the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. You know, the cross may have looked like a moment of weakness, but it was actually God's plan unfolding. It may have looked like defeat, but it was actually the way that God took victory and changed everything for us. So I think that means for us today that if we've been given any wisdom, any gifts, any insight, any education, it's not for us to climb up the ladder. It's for us to kneel down, to serve, to love, to live in such a way that people might not see how smart and how brilliant we are, but for people to see how beautiful and how loving Jesus is. Where has God asked you to serve in this way, to love people in this way, to exercise wisdom, your gifts for others, for the good of others, to point them towards Jesus?
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.